I caught a glimpse of this show on the BBC the other week called Scotland's Sacred Isles with Ben Fogle. Ben Fogle's well known to British audiences. He does lots of outdoorsy kind of programs. And in the series, Ben explores the islands where Christianity first arrived in Scotland back in the 5th and 6th centuries. Many of these islands are isolated and sparsely populated even today. In fact, a lot of them are completely uninhabited. And the weather can often be fierce in that part of the world as well. But these are the landing points where the first intrepid Christian missionaries arrived in Scotland all those centuries ago. And as Ben charts their path, he notices how dangerous it would have been to cross oceans in little skin-lined willow-framed boats, navigating stormy seas and whirlpools. And he knows the survival skills that these men, these early Christians, would have needed to sustain themselves on these very remote islands.
Having chosen this island on which to settle, they needed all their survival skills to feed and sustain themselves. Incredibly, the stone shelters they built still stand today, having withstood 1,400 harsh Scottish winters. It's believed they could be the oldest standing Christian buildings in Britain. They might look primitive, but they are a marvel of engineering.
Wow. They were proper artisans and engineers.
After marvelling at their ingenuity and talking about how they even built a seat of learning on the island, he starts to consider what kind of men these early Christians must have been.
I find this kind of island particularly moving. And maybe because there's something, maybe I'm searching for something. And maybe that's where I can relate to some of those early Christian pilgrims. They were hardy men. Imagine, they are a cross between, someone who is so driven by their passion for God and the toughest bloke you've ever met. And that's a really weird, unusual mix.
When I heard that comment, I think at first I was a little bit confused because I began to wonder why Ben thought that was such a weird and unusual combination for a man to be driven and passionate about God, but also masculine, rugged, tough, adventurous, good with their hands, etc. Where's the anomaly there? Why should those two things not coexist within the same person? However, as I thought about this a bit more in the following days, I think I began to understand his mindset and why he thinks the way that he does. I began to think firstly of something I think I first touched upon back in 2013 with the Restless Church series. And it's that the church really has become quite a feminized place to the point that men often don't see it as a place for them at all, especially masculine men. I mean, let's consider worship. I think I used this clip back in 2013 as well, but this is the comedian Tim Hawkins talking about the type of songs that we typically sing in church these days.
Final request. You guys wonder why men don't sing a lot in worship? Well, here's the deal. I think it's because men and women, we express love differently. Okay, and a lot of songs are written with the feminine way of expressing love. And men just don't get into it as much. A lot of songs are feminine. It's like, I want to feel your face. I want to touch your face. I want to get to know you. Write some worship songs for men, Watch the game with me, Lord.
It's said in jest, but I think there's something in that. When you compare recent worship songs and the lyrics of those songs to ones that came out in the past of, say, the Victorian period, the muscular Christianity era of the 1800s, things like Onward Christian Soldiers, The Old Rugged Cross, A Mighty Fortress is Our God, Will Your Anchor Hold in the Storm of Life, or even songs like The Master's Call, which I recently discovered and I like, so it's worth a mention. There's been this definite tilt away from songs that speak about spiritual warfare and sacrifice and the call to duty, and far more towards songs centered on emotive, almost romantic imagery, really. Something else I spoke about in 2013 is how church activities are often feminized and centered around face-to-face relational activities, which men often don't respond to. Here's a clip from the American psychologist Jonathan Haidt that will explain this difference between male and female activities.
So the master variable here, I believe, is a set of motivations that we've talked about psychology for 50 years called agency and communion. So everybody has needs for agency, to be an agent, to make things happen. A child knocks over a block tower. It's thrilling. I did that. I caused that to fall. So that's agency. And then communion is connection, being part of a group, being welcomed and embraced and connecting. So everyone has both motives. But on average, boys have stronger agency motives. And when you let boys and girls choose what to do, the boys are going to gravitate more towards games that allow agency. And so fake war is one of the best examples. They want to practice their skills. Boys, I think, are evolutionarily programmed for hunting and war, to enjoy hunting and war. I found this out when I was 29 years old and for the first time in my life played paintball with my buddies. And hunting each other, we were mixed in with other people, but hunting each other in small groups and shooting guns to try to hit each other was the most thrilling thing we'd ever done.
That'll get you. Yeah.
So that was really cool. Like, wow, there's like a room in my heart for being a hunter and a warrior. Like I didn't really know it was there, but it was. So anyway, boys choose to pursue agency motives. Girls choose to pursue more communion motives. They talk more with each other. Girls like to do things face to face. Boys like to do things shoulder to shoulder. Like we're next to each other, but we're doing something.
I need to bring this up. So in Robin Dunbar's book, Friends, which came out maybe 18 months ago, he's got this phenomenal study. So the next time that you're at a party, look at the angle of the feet that women have when they talk to each other, and look at the angle of the feet that men have.
Like what? What do you mean? What do you see?
Women will talk perpendicular, 180 degrees. They'll be pretty much straight on like this.
Oh.
Men talk at about 120 degrees.
Oh, that's fascinating.
So they blade.
Perfect.
And the reason being that this is a bit of sort of evolutionary bro psychology coming in, but I think it's true. If even try it, you can try it the next time that you're at a party. Just, you'll be stood sort of like this with a guy, just blading on. And just turn yourself so that you're actually straight onto them. And there's this just it rises up inside of you.
So women are typically more motivated by community, whereas men are typically more motivated by being able to use their agency in the world. Therefore, whereas women will typically be drawn to church activities that center around face-to-face communication, connection, being welcomed into a group, like coffee mornings and fellowship meetings and things like that, men are far less interested in that kind of thing because men need a mission in life. They're far more motivated by being able to use their agency. They want to be called to a battle or be given something to build in life. They don't want to stand face to face with people standing around talking as much as they want to stand side by side with people as they work together towards some great mission or goal. And the majority of church activities, I think, are in this sense tilted in the feminine direction towards fellowship meetings, towards coffee mornings and so forth. And it's not that Christianity doesn't have this call to mission and even to battle. Jesus gave us the Great Commission to go impact the world and storm hell's gates. It's just that the church doesn't often get into that. I think it would be a good idea if churches at the beginning of every year set achievable targets and goals, things they wanted to affect in the community and in the real world that year. And I think if men were called to this world-changing movement, which required their agency, where they knew their skills were needed to achieve these goals, they would rise to that challenge. It's just that in church so often, there is no challenge, but rather, if anything, they're actually encouraged to be passive. So it's a well-known statistic that in churches these days, there are roughly 2 women for every 1 man. 2/3 of the church across all denominations nearly is female. And this isn't serving anyone. Just by coincidence, as I was thinking about this topic, I saw this clip on X.
Let men be men. Stop feminizing or making the church effeminate. If men are allowed to be men, if they're allowed to have that drive, if they're allowed to use their testosterone and make something out of it, be productive and work hard, then they would come back to the church. They're very effective. They're very needed. But they're not really given permission to be masculine in a lot of churches right now. We need to talk about the hard things and we need to let men be men.
Now, that same day, I came across this post on X as well, which says, basically every pretty Christian girl I've spoken to in the past year has had the same complaints about dating. They want to be wives, but the single men at their church are not particularly masculine and guys never ask them out. Further, I know a lot of tough masculine men that would ask these women out in a heartbeat, Few of them have a desire to go to church, though, not because they don't care about not going to church. They want to go to church, but feel repulsed by the general effeminacy of the experience when they go. They aren't into the singing, the obvious effeminacy and weakness of the preaching, etc. They're interested in hard-hitting, uncompromising biblical truths, not an experience that feels like it's tailored towards women. The fact that churches are completely failing to attract masculine men, it tells me something is deeply wrong with the church in America. It needs to be fixed. Lose those men and you've lost the country. Now, I don't know who this person is that made this post, and I haven't checked, but underneath there were lots of comments from women suggesting that there is a bit of truth in this post, that they're looking around the church and they're just not seeing enough masculine men. I've heard girls make that complaint actually in real life too. So there seems to be a bit of truth in this. I think that preaching comment is interesting as well, because I think in general, the church is longing for teachers who just get up there with a bit of courage and bravery and just speak the plain truth, who don't mince their words, who don't bow to the cultural pressures of the day, but who are just willing to tell it how it is. I think both men and women would appreciate more of that in church. But either way, all of this stuff is affirming Ben Fogel's comment that to see a passionate Christian man who is also masculine, rugged, adventurous is not as common as it should be. Now, the next thing that came to mind as I considered this was a C.S. Lewis quote where he said that church in general should feel like a place where you get trained for spiritual warfare. He said, "Enemy occupied territory, that is what this world is. Christianity is the story of how the rightful king has landed, you might say landed in the skies, and is calling us all to take part in a great campaign of sabotage. When you go to church, you are really listening in to the secret wireless from our other friends. That is why the enemy is so anxious to prevent us from going." And then coincidentally, just after reading that, I had this video recommended to me on the same subject.
The church is already too feminized, too soft, too focused on feelings and emotions and being welcoming and inclusive. All of that is coming from liberal women in these churches, or most of it anyway. They're the ones driving this. The church, Christendom in America is what I'm talking about all of Christianity basically, with rare exception, is far too soft and feminine. And again, it's been that way for years. And it's a self-perpetuating problem. The more feminine the church is, the less men want to go. And the less that men want to go, the more women are in charge because there's no one else there. And the more they're in charge, the more feminine it gets, and the less men want to go. So the more women are in charge, the more feminine it gets, the less men want to go. And it's just on and on and on. A self-perpetuating cycle. It's really more of a death spiral, self-perpetuating death spiral for the church. You know, C.S. Lewis, and I'm going to butcher the quote, I don't remember the exact quote, but he talks about how going to church, it should have the feeling of, of getting battle plans, of you're in the middle of a war and you're meeting and you're going over your battle plans for the battle ahead. And you should have very much of that feeling of like spiritual warfare. And you're all soldiers and you're meeting together and you're discussing what your battle strategy is going to be. That's the feeling that church should have. He put it much more eloquently than that. But that's right. That's what church should feel like, because that's what it is. We're in the middle of a spiritual warfare, and that's what church is. And church is supposed to equip us for that spiritual warfare. And one of the advantages that we're supposed to have in going to church every week is that it equips us for the battle ahead for the next week. And if churches have that feeling, then you're going to have a lot more men showing up, because that's what men want. It's not what churches feel like. That's not the to use the, as the kids would say, that's not the vibe. Okay, that's not the vibe you get from most churches. And the music is very feminine music, and everything about it. The message from the pastor, a very feminine message, always about welcoming and being nice and being friends. And men sit in there and they are bored to death by it. They are just bored to tears and feeling like they get nothing out of it. And they leave in droves. The women take over more, and it's, again, continues and continues.
A few other things came to mind as I continued to mull this over. I thought about the image that Christian men have in general in popular culture these days. So characters like Ned Flanders and his boys Rod and Todd came to mind. They're portrayed as being a bit wet, just scared of their own shadow, easily shocked and horrified, unable to handle real life. In this episode, they're afraid of a moth. Little phrases came to mind, like I remember on Top Gear and the Grand Tour, they would occasionally use the phrase Christian motorist to refer to someone who was driving in a slow and overly timid fashion, like an old lady. Christian ministers on TV, in comedies and movies, have you ever noticed how they always tend to be portrayed by these little old men who are, very soft and timid and gentle. They're just easily shocked and again, can't handle real life. You know the type I mean, that kind of stereotype. And you could say, well, that's just the world. That's just an expression of a world and a culture that hates Christianity. So it's just mocking Christianity. So just ignore it, pay it no mind. And that's my natural reaction. That's what I want to do. But it does seem that many people within the church also have this perception. That's what my research over the past few days has kind of been uncovering. Single Christian women seem to be bemoaning the lack of masculine men in church today that would make good husbands. Many Christian men themselves seem to be staying away from church because to them it feels like a feminine experience where they don't belong and have no place with feminine music and soft preaching. So if that's the perception within the church, I can see why the average person on the street, when they think about Christian men, may have a similar kind of image. And therefore, I think it's something that we need to discuss, we need to think about, and perhaps address. Ben Fogle's comment about it being weird to think of passionate Christian men driven by God also being masculine, tough, rugged, and adventurous. I can see why that may seem to be unusual, something of an anomaly to him. I can see where he's getting that idea from within the current context when you look at the current church and the way that it's perceived. There's a stat, which is actually heavily disputed, but it's still worth mentioning. I'm still going to talk about it. It says that when a child is the first to attend church, families follow 3% of the time. When the mother is first, families follow 17% of the time. However, when a father turns to Christ first, the family follows 93% of the time. Now, the reason I'm still mentioning that, even though it's disputed, is because another Swiss study produced very similar findings. I won't read this one out, but you can pause it to see what it says. So if the men come and stay, everyone connected to that man seems to follow behind him. And if those men are not coming because they perceive church to be an effeminate place where they don't belong, feel inspired, or are able to use their agency, and if the general impression we're giving to the world is that church is not a place for masculine men, then we need to change that perception. We need to make it understood, in fact, that actually masculinity, masculine men and Christianity should go hand in hand because God, after all, made masculinity. Masculinity is God's idea. He invented it, just as he made femininity. That's his idea as well. Therefore, Christian men should embody God-given masculinity just as Christian women should embody God-given femininity. Christian men should be like those early pioneers that traversed the oceans and confronted danger and built communities with their bare hands. They should be adventurous, brave, courageous, strong, industrious, resourceful, able to protect and provide. These things should be synonymous with Christian men. Given that feminism and I would say culture as a whole today is attacking masculinity as toxic, and young men, I think, as a result, are kind of looking for places where they fit and are needed. They're kind of asking, what are we for? Where do we belong? What's our purpose in life? And I think the church would flourish and solve so many of our problems and the world's problems if it said to young men, all men in fact, you fit and are needed here. You fit and are needed in the church. Come be a part of this world-changing movement, this great commission to change the world and impact lives. Church is not just a place to have coffee mornings and fellowship meetings, although there's nothing wrong with those things, and it's not about getting rid of those things. We need to keep them. We need to keep things that serve female roles and build community. We need those things, but we just need to add the things that inspire men too. It's not about taking away, it's about adding something here. I think if men came back to church, families would then follow. Single women in church would then find masculine men for husbands and create strong Christian families, and we need that. The church would start taking on the world again, and we need that. We'd get more uncompromising sermons, and we need that too. So in short, thank you, Ben Fogle, for prompting this thought journey, because I think actually, in retrospect, many people in the church would agree that something needs to change here. The church needs good, masculine men to lead it, to confront culture, to preach uncomfortable truths, and to reassert Christ's leadership. The church needs good men. It needs masculinity.